You are listening to GeekFest Rants on the IC Robots Radio Network.
You have located GeekFest Rants, the entertainment podcast for genre geeks like you.
Shall we play a game?
Covering the world of vintage and current film and television since 2010.
Game over, man! Game over!
Featuring in-depth conversations on sci-fi, horror, fantasy, comics, toys, and conventions.
So say we all! So say we all!
And now sit back, relax, and enjoy today's show.
It's the new Star Wars Landspeeder.
Wow, looks like it's floating. The sand people are coming. It's up to Luke Skywalker and his Landspeeder to get us out.
Action figures each sold separately. The Landspeeder has a snap-open space hatch, and Star Wars action figures R2-D2 and C-3PO fit right in back.
Hurry, they're dancing. Activate spring glide wheels.
The Force goes with us.
Yeah!
Kenner's new Star Wars Landspeeder. Action figures each sold separately.
Hi everybody, and welcome once again to GeekFest Rants. My name is Carlos Perron, and today we are going to be talking about a certain toy that I got when I was very young, and its modern version that recently came out. And by that I'm talking about the Landspeeder, Luke Skywalker's Landspeeder from the original Star Wars. We are going to look at how this toy has gone from one of the most basic, original Kenner Star Wars toys to this most modern version that was put out very recently, and all its advancements and improvements, and just to see the before and after and to talk about that, it's really, really amazing what an incredible job has been done. And we'll give you a little background, obviously, on how the Landspeeder came about, the history of the design and all the inspirations for it and that sort of thing. Then we are going to jump to our posters of the month. And this time around, we are going to do Fright Night and the Terminator, two great favorite films of mine. And we're going to try to dig a little deeper into, the design of the poster and how they differ from previous ones and that sort of thing. So, let's start with the Landspeeder.
You can collect them all!
You are a toy!
Batteries not included.
Get those wonderful toys.
Details on specially marked packages at participating stores.
Is that the $6 Million Man's boss?
It's Oscar Goldman.
Why do you have that?
That's worth a lot of money. That's much more valuable than Steve Austin.
Action figures each sold separately.
Hi, I'm Chucky, and I'm your friend to the end.
Some assembly required.
All your favorite Star Wars heroes and villains. I have 3 of each. 1 to display, 1 to open, and 1 just in case.
Today I want to take the time to talk about one specific Star Wars toy that recently has been released in its latest incarnation. And by this I'm talking about the Landspeeder, Luke's Landspeeder. This is a toy that I own the Kenner original version, and I now own the Hasbro 6-inch black line version. And there have been many built in between these two. Granted, the Kenner one was the first, and this Hasbro one is the latest. But in between, we've had Micro Machine versions, different Hasbro versions, 3 3/4 inch versions, die-cast versions, all types, I'm sure that I'm even forgetting at this point, that have been made, Lego versions, just about every single licensee probably has put out a version of the Landspeeder. And even way back during the Kenner line, they put out a remote control version of the Landspeeder. So, this thing has been pretty beat to death by now in one way or the other. But I want to talk about the differences and the similarities in them and the advancements in them. But in order to do that, I have to start from the beginning in terms of giving a little bit of background as to how the Landspeeder came about. Now, the original intent of the Landspeeder, as far as Star Wars goes, as far as George Lucas goes, was that this was supposed to be Luke's hot rod, similar to how he had done American Graffiti, which is all about kids, cruising in hot rods and that sort of thing. This was Luke's version of that. However, Luke, in comparison, I think, to most of the American Graffiti kids, is supposed to be a much poorer kid in a more isolated town than, where we're at in American Graffiti. Other people own land speeders. They're a little bigger. They're more family oriented. And there are in the background, you could see some other land speeders that are completely, covered head to toe in terms of you ride inside of them, and they're much bigger. And his was purposely made to look smaller. It's a convertible, which again kind of goes with the hot rod type of mentality. And it's pretty beat up. This isn't a, factory brand new, sparkling, shiny vehicle. Again, part of it is the environment. This desert environment beats the crap out of this thing, and it's got dents and bumps and scratches, and it's missing pieces here and there, but it's the best that Luke can do, and most likely, for his character, this is probably the biggest luxury item he owns, because, he lives a pretty, utilitarian type of basic life in the desert as the adopted son of a moisture farmer. Now, the concepts for the Landspeeder can be found initially in two different locations. The biggest and most prominent of all is the Ralph McQuarrie painting of it. The other one is the Colin Cantwell model mock-up of it. The Cantwell one is very different than the finished product. It is the most different from the finished product, because while it still kind of looks like a possible hovering kind of vehicle, it is not very slick and sleek and aerodynamic looking. It is more of a circular type of vehicle. It does have its own little canopy section, and, the jets and the propulsion and all that stuff is there, and the fins, but it's a very round type of design. Nothing like what we have at the end. The Ralph McQuarrie one is the one that resembles the finished product the most. And by that, you have to, if you look at your Ralph McQuarrie paintings, the original inspirational paintings that George took around everywhere to try to get people to imagine what he was talking about, is a painting that you're kind of watching this cliff. On the left-hand side, on the top of this little cliff, you have a Landspeeder. You have what appears to be the droids, and there's Luke looking down, possibly with binoculars, down the cliff into what appears to be a town in the far horizon, near some kind of mountain setting. Now, the droids are obviously C-3PO and R2-D2. Luke at the time was not even Luke. Luke at the time is a girl. This was before the character was kind of split into different characters when the lead was a girl. So this particular version of Luke, I believe, has a very long rifle in the back, which is something that kind of carried over into it. And if you look really, really carefully at the picture of Luke, or I don't know if it's necessarily Leia or whatever name the female character would have, you could see, if you really look, especially in the chest area, that this is definitely a girl. But this is one of those pictures that you have to look for that. When you look at it, you're like, yeah, that's Luke looking down at, Mos Eisley. That's pretty simple. It's pretty easy, but it's not that easy. Anyway, the point is, not Luke or the droids, is the Landspeeder. What you have there is McQuarrie's final version of the Landspeeder, for those paintings, where you have it resemble pretty much what the last one will eventually look like. The only difference is that, while it is hovering, the engines on the sides, they're not as round as they are in the final product. These are a little more flat, a little more rectangular, if you will, with a slight curvature at the edges. And they seem to protrude off of the main body of the speeder with very fine, thin kind of wings towards the ends. So the connection is not as solid and as thick as with the final product. The entire capsule area where the seats are looks as if it's completely encased in some kind of a protective glass bubble. And it has two doors on either side of the bubble itself that are kind of folded up. Kind of like almost like a DeLorean type, where instead of the doors opening, left and right, they open upwards. So they look like two other wings that are kind of floating up in the, up from the top. Then this one also does not have the center engine that eventually it will have, but instead it has two fins, which I guess are supposed to be for, flying so fast that it kind of keeps it into kind of like a plane, having a tail. Well, this has these two fins on either side that I guess it's supposed to keep it balanced or whatever. So, it looks like a very futuristic car that is hovering with slight wings on it when you really, really take a close look at it. Now, this was, like I said, the inspiration, I think, for what we ended up with at the end. However, even for George Lucas himself to be able to come up with certain ideas, that he then kind of tells his artists like McQuarrie or Cantwell or some other people what he's envisioning, there's a good chance, because we know he was a fan of, Buck Rogers and Flash Gordon, the old traditional serial type of science fiction characters, heroes, space heroes. There is a specific Flash Gordon animation, cartoon, if you will, from 1971, from a story by Michael W. Kaluta. And in it, Flash Gordon is riding this little kind of space car. And the space car resembles very, very much like what the speeder kind of looks like. It has that U-shaped front. It has those engines on the side that protrude to even more rounded engines, coming off these little wings. It has a little bubble cockpit. This one also has a fin right in the middle. Instead of two fins on the sides like the McQuarrie concept, this one has one big fin in the middle. And, if you look at the flying sequences, they look pretty close, to what, the Landspeeder does in terms of how it was designed and resembles. So once they finalized what they wanted it to look like, and believe it or not, it took a while. So in other words, while they still have all this artwork as inspirational material to go about and try to get it done, I just finished reading a book called Cinema Alchemy by Roger Christian, who is the set designer and one of the art people for Star Wars and many, many, many other films. And he talks about how they kind of had to do it in stages. They had to do a whole bunch of mock-ups first, real-size mock-ups, to try to figure out how to get this thing to work. So it wasn't done like they sometimes do it now, where they can do these small models, and then once they determine which one they're going to use with the small models, they move forward to building larger ones. This was done differently because they had to figure out how to make this thing, not only what this thing is going to look like, but how to physically and mechanically make it function. Where will the wheels be? How would they be hidden? How would they, what kind of chassis was this thing going to have in order to support the weight of the actual vehicle? So they put together, the art department, they put together this plywood version of the Landspeeder. And again, at first it looked very different, because at first it did not have the round engines on the sides or the middle. It had more of these kind of flat kind of engines, on the sides. It didn't have that middle one. And like I said, this was one of the first designs where they realized that it was just way too big. What they were constructing was just not the size that they were really looking for, because it was making it way too big, and it was also hard to maneuver such a thing. So they had to go back and try again. And then the second time, once again, they had the problem that it was too large, but they kept trying to bring the size a little, smaller in size, because it's supposed to look tight. They wanted the actors to look like they're in a tight, small, little kind of race car looking thing. It's not supposed to look comfortable, especially when you have in a certain shot 4 characters in it. So the third time around, they actually designed it, I believe, on the chassis of a Volkswagen Beetle bus. So they were able to kind of maneuver things a lot better, but instead of having 2 wheels in the front, they had only 1 wheel in the front and 2 in the back, so it's kind of like a 3-wheel vehicle. A little more like what we're used to seeing, once we got, to the final product. Now, this time they got the right size, but still they were having problems with, maneuvering it. So at a certain point, they went to a different company, who were also building these smaller cars, and I think some of them might have been used in some movies or maybe in some James Bond stuff or something like that. And they finally were able to nail it down and to have what we now are used to as the final design of the Landspeeder. What they ended up doing was they ended up constructing two. One of them on wheels, those 3 wheels we talked about earlier, and one of them that had no wheels, but it would be connected to this long mechanical arm, like a crane kind of arm, that would just swing it around in a circle. So this way they can get shots of it slowing down or taking off without seeing anything underneath. So to be able to create that illusion of it hovering over the ground. So they used that one. And then they had the other one, the one with the wheels, which is the ones that they were used for very long shots when you have everybody on it or that sort of thing. They would use that one too. Now, in order to disguise the wheels, they used a whole bunch of different methods. When they were really far away, they tried using mirrors underneath so that the mirror would kind of mirror the sandy, rocky ground that they would be on. When they was really far away, the waviness of the mirror would kind of cause this mirage effect, which is pretty normal in the desert when you have an object from really far away. You get that little humidity, smoky kind of feel. And then at other times, they would be able to, through rotoscoping, through animation, basically insert a shadow underneath. So by inserting the shadow, they were also able to hide some of those wheels also. Now, this is something that eventually down the line, when they got to different versions of the home releases of Star Wars, especially the special edition of Star Wars and the future ones that came after that, they were able to digitally improve on those effects to be able to get rid of some of that, wheel, covering up. But that's primarily how it was done for the movie. So now going forward to the toys, we have our first initial Landspeeder that was sold. And this is a vehicle that I used to have, and I have again because I repurchased it many, many years ago. And overall, they did a fantastic job with this vehicle. It is big enough that it holds 4 figures. You have your Luke and your Ben who could sit inside. It resembles pretty much the one in the movie in terms of how it's painted, more or less, the color. Obviously, it doesn't have any of the weathering or the stress scratches and paint nicks and all that stuff that the one in the film had, because most of the toys, I remember, would be sold as if they were brand new. It is later on when they started releasing certain versions of certain toys with special stickers or special coloring. You had your X-Wing, the dirty X-Wing and the clean X-Wing, and same thing with the TIE Fighters. They had multiple versions of some of these. But the Landspeeder is just a one-off type of vehicle. Again, unless you're talking about the remote control one, but that's not what I'm talking about. The one I'm talking about, like I said, it resembles everything pretty close. And what's amazing about it is like some of its extra features. Well, the main feature is that they have to design a toy that resemble that hovering trick that the vehicle is supposed to do. And the way they did it for the toy was that they actually created 3 wheels in the bottom that with the push of a lever, you could retract those wheels completely so you have a smooth, flat bottom. So if you want to hold the speeder and make it fly, with your hand to kind of hold it and make it hover and do that sort of thing, that's fine. But if you also want it to roll like a typical toy car, and you have to remember, being able to roll like a toy car is a very big selling aspect when it comes to what is considered to be a boy toy. These Star Wars figures and ships were primarily targeted for boys. So being able to roll in that fashion as a traditional toy car would, is a big deal. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the dimensions are pretty good compared to the 3 3/4 inch figures. Obviously, they could not make it exactly the same proportion as the film because overall, if you guys listen to some of our older shows, you kind of realize, and we talked about this, that for Kenner, even though they purposely decided to make the figures 3 3/4 inch, because they knew that if they were going to start selling spaceships, playsets, accessories, vehicles, anything like that, they would have to be somewhat in proportion to the 3 3/4 size. Anything bigger than 3 3/4 size would then make everything else much bigger too. So if, for example, like they do now, with some items, have the 6-inch size figures. You know, the whole black line, 6-inch line now. If they would have had 6-inch figures back then, and they would have to roll out, you know, all the accessories and all the vehicles and ships that they had in the past, these ships would have to be probably twice as big as they are now. However, the thing to keep in mind is that even though we're dealing with 3 3/4-inch figures, the size of the ships that they made for these 3 3/4-inch figures were still undersized. They were still slightly smaller than they should be. Typical example is your X-Wing. Think about the X-Wing in the film when we see it at the end in the Yavin hangar. You know, Luke has to climb a ladder to get to the cockpit. Luke can walk under the wings by simply hunching his head down. Now here, for the toy, if you put the 3 3/4-inch Luke, X-Wing Luke, standing next to the X-Wing, he pretty much is as tall as the tip of the R2-D2 that's on top of the X-Wing. Maybe even taller. So they did have to sacrifice size for these vehicles and ships to be able to be made anyway. Granted, a kid really doesn't care that much. You know, us insane fans can have hours and hour long conversations about how the proportions are not exactly right. But kids don't care, and kids didn't care back then. The kids only cared about the fact that you had an action figure, you were going to put him inside a ship, and you're going to fly it around your house. But, you know, that is one of the best examples. For a TIE fighter, it's a little different, I think, because even though the TIE fighter is also most likely undersized, just like everything else is undersized, it makes even less of a big deal because of the fact that we never actually see a TIE fighter in a hangar with a pilot climbing into it. You know, later on, you know, different movies, different TV shows, artwork, cartoons, you know, we kind of can tell now what the size of a TIE fighter is and everything. But back then, for toy purposes, it's pretty much in the same scale as the X-Wing. Now, again, the more you thought about it, because of the X-Wing, you know, Luke standing next to it, you could tell there's a problem with the size. And even though we never saw a TIE fighter pilot standing next to a TIE fighter, we did see a TIE fighter chasing an X-Wing, and we could kind of tell that they're kind of in proportion to each other, you know, pretty much. You know, one is not 10 times bigger than the other. They're pretty much evenly shaped, not evenly sized ships, not obviously in terms of length, but, you know, the height, there's some things that your brain can connect. So when it came to the Landspeeder is pretty close. But, again, traditionally, like everything else, they had to make it smaller. Now, why would they make it smaller? Like I said before, yes, it is because they would have to make it, if they did make it bigger, it would cost more. Some things would cost more than others. Now, here's something to keep in mind. An X-Wing, if you made it the proper size, when you're dealing with 3 3/4 action figures, it might be twice as big, maybe 2.5 times bigger. Think about it. In order for Luke to walk under the wing that is folded down, that thing would have to be pretty damn tall. So yeah, it would have to be pretty, and I think that even the nose would have to be much longer too. Think about how Luke walked over the nose and during Empire Strikes Back as he's walking along the edge after the crashed X-Wing. With the Kenner figures and toys, there's nowhere near that. So if you have to spend twice as much plastic or even more in building this thing, you would have to charge your client twice as much. And that's one of the things they tried to keep the prices down. The smaller the ship, the less plastic, the less manufacturing, the less price. So on a ship like that, it would really be a killer to have to double or even triple the price because people just wouldn't buy it. With the Landspeeder, when you really look at it and you kind of measure it, they did kind of go a little short on it. The width seems to be pretty good, more or less, but the length seems to be a little tiny short. Now the question then becomes, why would you then purposely make it smaller? Well, you could still save a little money from their perspective by making it a little shorter. It is a little less plastic. And it's also consistency. If you're already used to having all these toys being a little smaller than usual, and all of a sudden they give you one that's the proper size, it might kind of stick out too much. So maybe that's part of the reasoning too. The other great feature with the Kenner Landspeeder is that you could pop the hood. There was a little button in the front, right at the tip of it, and if you pressed it, the hood would pop up, and you would have inside a little sticker that you would place yourself of the engine. But in that hood, I remember we used to hide guns and lightsabers and any kind of little accessories we had from the action figures, and it would be great. The only problem I used to have with the Landspeeder was in trying to keep the figures on top from kind of falling off. And this is something that I found out many, many years later, that this particular ship had an extra feature that I didn't know about. But before we do that, let's compare it to the new one. The new Landspeeder, the one I'm talking about here, is the one that came out about a year ago. I think it was a San Diego Comic-Con exclusive. It was first, I think, previewed at one of the last celebrations. Might have been 2017 celebration. I could be wrong. So this is not that old. This is maybe a year old or even less. And what they had is, for the new 6-inch line that they've been pumping out now for a while, that I think little by little they're trying to make this the standard line for everybody. I think they would love to get away from the 3 3/4 inch and be able to just go 6-inch, because they can charge you 2-3 times the price. Granted, the figures are gorgeous. The detail is amazing. The articulation is fantastic. And then little by little, they started introducing accessories or additional things having to do with these 6-inch lines. Obviously, they haven't gone too crazy yet with size in terms of giant vehicles, but little by little, they're introducing vehicles here and there, or creatures. And the Landspeeder is one of them. Now, the way that they rolled this thing out was that they have two versions. There's a San Diego Comic-Con exclusive that sold, I think, for something like $90, which is an amazing price, nowhere near what I would pay for anything like that. And then they would have a cheaper version available for retailers. The difference between the two, other than the fact that the first one, the more expensive one, was only an exclusive to San Diego Comic-Con, is that the paint application and the weathering was a little more detailed in this more expensive one. Plus, if you pop the hood and press the little button, you could actually see a part of the engine turning inside, which is a cute little trick. It was a very nice, cute little thing. But other than that, in terms of features or things that the thing could do that's different, there really wasn't much difference. Later on, I believe they sold one in stores for, I think, either $50 or $60. And this was the scaled down version one. And by scaled down, it means that basically it's not as detailed in weathering. It is exactly the same device. It has the same engine, except that it doesn't turn. That little button that you have on the other one to make it turn. This one, the button doesn't work and nothing turns inside. But the plastic, the sculpting, is all identical. I would say 90% of the painting is exactly the same. Now, what makes this so much different than the other one is that, first of all, it doesn't have any wheels in the bottom. You could either hold it on your hand like you would the original, with the retracted legs, with the retracted wheels, or you can place this clear plastic base on it so it kind of stands about, a centimeter off wherever you place it to simulate that distance for the proper ratio of the figures that you have in this thing. What can I tell you about this? The inside is incredible. It has all of these controls and joysticks and wheel and seat. It has the paint applications all over it, where there are scratches. You can actually see scratches along certain sections of the body. You see like paint that's been flaked off of it, resembling incredibly very close to what we see on film. The front of it has a dent, like it got smashed against something, which is so cool. You have the 3 engines, the 3 jet engines, and one of them is completely missing a cover. Like it was, I think, when the Tusken Raiders are kind of taking it apart. If you pop the hood has a section that's exposed, so even with the hood closed, you could see some of the internal workings of the engine. And then when you pop the hood, it's not like the original where you can store your guns in there. No, this is a full sculpted hood. the engine is there, and there's pipes and all types of devices inside that you could look at, and even the inside of the hood, the cover itself, it's all sculpted. The design is just fantastic. The amount of, even though, like I said, this is not this special one. This is just the basic one. It is still incredibly sculpted. Now, a couple of extra features that were not included, I believe maybe not in the film and also not in the original toy definitely, is that back behind the seats where the droids sit, there's 2 panels there that you can pop up. And in one of them, you have some more engine type of stuff, but the other panel is empty. So that's a panel where you can keep in that box some little tidbits, keep a gun in there or water bottle or whatever the hell you would put in there. But it does have that, which is really, really cool. The other thing that you see here on the side of it would be on the driver's side, there's this one clip where you can snap Luke's gun, his long rifle that he has in Tatooine. You could snap it there, so it kind of hangs on the side of the Landspeeder as it's traveling. Because if you think about it, where the hell did Luke put that thing? Now, I didn't mention Luke. Just like in the San Diego Comic-Con exclusive, this particular vehicle comes with what I would consider to be the Gilligan poncho Luke Skywalker. And that is because it is a typical, Tatooine Luke Skywalker, but he comes also with a couple of extra accessories, including the poncho that he uses, the Gilligan hat with the goggles, the macro binoculars, the long rifle that he kind of takes when he goes after the Tusken Raiders. He is wearing a belt with a whole bunch of different types of, those little leather attachments around it. And he comes with a fully extended blue lightsaber. Now, you can take this figure, pop him in there, or not. I normally don't keep him popped in. But the best part about this, that I wasn't planning on buying it, I really admire it when I saw it, and I was like, there's no way in hell I'm able to afford this. But a couple of months ago, I forget exactly when, they were offering it at Amazon for $20. I was like, what? This must be some kind of... And before I could even change my mind or even think about it twice, I snapped on it right away. And it came, and it was probably one of the best bargains I've ever gotten for something of such high quality. Now, granted, I know it's not this exclusive, but normally this would have been a $50 item or a $60 item, and it only cost $20. So if you can get your hands on it, I strongly recommend it, because you can see the progression of the toy, how it started and where it is now. It is just absolutely absurd how fantastic this thing looks. It is simply a work of art. Now, going back to the older one, the original one of the things I mentioned was that it had one additional feature that I only found out very recently, because somehow it kind of evaded me all these years. If you put all your figures in the original Landspeeder, okay, you have your Luke and Ben in the front, just like in the movie. Makes sense. The droids kind of sit on top, kind of behind the seats. They don't have seats. They're kind of sitting on top of the actual body of the rear, in between that middle engine. Which, when you think about it, really, it's like that middle engine is such a dangerous thing, because wouldn't the air would be sucked in through one part and then the air coming out of the jet part? So wouldn't it be super dangerous for Luke to, a strand of hair get caught there, or a piece of his clothing to get caught in there and get sucked into the engine? But hey, it's a movie. We can't really be so nitpicky, but that's what we do. But anyway, the droids sit back there. C-3PO pretty much sits more or less like a person, and R2-D2 is kind of down, laying on his face, more or less, or on his back, if you will. C-3PO, it is possible, I imagine, I never really saw it that close, but it is possible that his legs are bent, because when you look at the new one, not at the old one is built in a way where the back of the seat, there's no space for anything. The back of the seat then gives way to the back of the body of the vehicle. But on the new one, what's really interesting is on the back of the seat, there's still some space back there for something to fit, whether it's luggage, equipment, whatever. But I could kind of see how if C-3PO was sitting there, he could kind of put his legs behind the seats. There is space there. R2, forget it. There's nothing he can do in there. That space is way too small for him. But for C-3PO purposes, it kind of would make sense, because for him to be sitting the way that a 3 3/4 figure sits, and remember, 3 3/4 figures don't have knee articulation, so you had to sit him in that L position, like it or not, which was a little difficult when you think about it, because what would happen is it would kind of push his butt way, 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 way close to the edge of the ship, thereby making it a little difficult to keep it balanced. Same thing with R2, because, he's got to be there. It's very, wobbly the way it is. But in the original Kenner Landspeeder, something I found out recently that I never knew was there is that behind the seats, there are 2 peg knobs, foot peg knobs, one for R2 and one for C-3PO. And the reason they're there is so you can actually take the figure and slide them into that peg knob on their feet. Same thing with R2-D2. He has a little peg hole, and secure them so that when you do move this vehicle around, they don't just fall right off like they normally would fall off. So that's a cute little thing that sometimes we never knew about it, or I don't know, maybe we just forgot it existed. But, when I finally re-saw it again, or people were telling me about it, I'm like, is that true? And then you go and check it out, it's like, it is true. It is there. And it was one of those moments where it's like, oh my God, I wonder if there are other things that these old, Kenner Star Wars related figures and, playsets and ships had that we either were not aware of or found that way, way later that these things existed. Well, apparently we did. Through Facebook, some of the different Star Wars or, action figure groups that I belong to, somebody posted all of a sudden that the Hoth Han Solo, that happens to have a holster. But it's a weird holster because you can't really stick anything in the holster. But it does have the strap of the holster, that part that would normally go around a gun to keep it in place in the holster. There is a lot of people that seem to be able to take his traditional Han Solo blaster and use one of the knobs or one of the holders, let's say, and slide it into the holster so Han could have his hands freed while the gun is placed in the holster, which is like, oh my God, I've never even heard of this. And some people are even saying that it's featured in the commercial. So I started looking for the commercial. I couldn't find it, but I'm trying to figure out, was this intentionally made that way? There are plenty of holsters in other figures, and none of them have that loop, that open loop design. The other one is, if you guys remember the Bush figure, Leia disguised as the bounty hunter Bush. Well, apparently you can take that long, long gun that she has and attach it to her back. So it's almost as if she's carrying it on her back, I guess with a strap or something. But it seems to be able to attach to whatever is hanging off her back. Not only that, but I've seen pictures of the helmet. If you remove the helmet and you remove the gun, you can attach both those things to her back. And people are claiming that was specially designed for that. So you could do that. Which is like, oh my God, I've never heard of this. Now, there are little, I guess, I don't know if you can call them bonus things or hidden things that you only find out through reading some of these crazy stories. If you own the Y-Wing, the original Kenner Y-Wing, if you look at the stickers before placing them inside and all over the actual ship, there is one sticker where the word Jane is kind of written in part of the characters of the design of the sticker. And the story is that this was by a designer who her name was Jane, so she kind of put her name on it. A similar situation is with the Dagobah playset. The original Empire Strikes Back Dagobah playset. There's a molded, it's either a snake or a tree root or something like that, where you can actually read the word Emily on it. And apparently, this was the designer's daughter's name. And the guy kind of hid her name on part of the sculpture. On Empire, we also have the Imperial playset, which is really the Bounty Hunter playset, if you will. I forget exactly the name of it. But in it, there's a feature in it, and it's written on the instructions or on the box itself that kind of previews what you're playing with, or one of the features. And it talks about an area of the toy where Vader can talk to the Grand Visor. Well, you're like, well, what the hell is a Grand Visor? In Empire, there was no Grand Visor. Vader talks to the Emperor. in one scene. He doesn't talk to anyone else. Well, apparently, again, what I'm hearing is that in one of the earlier versions of the script, before Vader can communicate with the Emperor, he first has to kind of communicate with one of the Emperor's lackeys, one of his advisors or whatever, and one of them is this Grand Visor. So somehow, part of that playset, they made a section for that based on that original script note that, hey, this is going to be something in the movie that you might want to incorporate into this playset. Now, this is a very unusual playset because it tries to be a lot of things and it kind of doesn't. So, for example, they basically wanted to do a Star Destroyer setting. Okay. Which is impossible, obviously, because of the size. So they tried to create some kind of a playset that would include certain areas of that. So you have kind of like Vader's room there, and you have where the bounty hunters meet and where the officers are using their machines and their controls. But it really doesn't mesh too well. I know it has a handle, so you can kind of carry it and float, walk around with it like it's a ship, but it has no real shape. I'm also told that you could dock it with a Millennium Falcon, which I am not sure if that's possible. I would have to read a little more into that. Another thing that's very rare that most people have not been able to find, but that apparently it does exist. One of the unproduced figures was a Luke Skywalker in Jedi robes that was supposed to come out at a way later point. And this was a Luke, which, as opposed to the Return of the Jedi, where Luke is wearing the black outfit and then they gave him a robe on top of it. This is supposed to be a Luke that has the molded Jedi robes, similar to how Ben Kenobi has the molded robes, or the Emperor has the molded robes, as opposed to trying to put in some kind of a soft good. Well, this is something that apparently made it to, I think, a catalog a long time ago. Galaxy far, far away. But they were able to pull that completely before it got that far. So at some point they were going to put it out, and I guess that somewhere prototypes existed and they've been lost in the shuffle. But aside from those, molds or sculptures of what it was supposed to look like, they apparently did have one that was fully painted to be used for catalog purposes. The AT-AT Commander was also a weird figure because it was sold as an AT-AT Commander, even though that in the movie it's General Veers, the only AT-AT Commander that we see, but it was never carded in that manner, except in Canada. In Canada, apparently they did release at some point, and it looked very hodgepodgey type of quick repackaging type of thing, but they apparently did it at some point, repackage the AT-AT Commander as General Veers, which kind of makes sense because that is what that character is based on. The famous rocket-firing Boba Fett is one that, obviously we all know the story, that it never really made it to the public because of the possible choking hazard. So that means that thing was never carded, it was never included in anything, you could never buy it, you would never get it, period. I get it. However, they did card one once for the 1978 New York Toy Fair. They used a final product one, a sample most likely, a prototype sample, and they carded it with the actual Boba Fett card. And they took it to the show, and eventually, many years later, it actually found its way into the marketplace. And I believe it's probably still in the process of trying to be sold. There was a feature on one of these pawn shows where they tried to sell it, I think for $150,000, but they would only be offered $100, so the sale never happened. This is years ago, so I don't know what it's up to now. I don't know if it got resold or if the guy's still holding on to it. I'm not sure. The famous vinyl Cape Jawa. This is a figure that is one of the holy grails of vintage Kenner Star Wars collecting. And most of us are under the impression that the vinyl Cape Jawa only came with Star Wars. Well, apparently, a few Australian versions of the vinyl Cape Jawa were released. They were found. They seem to be authentic. However, the vinyl cape is a slightly different shade, but it kind of corresponds with the fact that some of these foreign markets, there are color variations because of where they're coming from. But what's interesting is that this was carded under the Empire Strikes Back card, which is really odd because everybody was under the impression that they kind of pulled the plug on it way before, than that. There's also proof that originally, and we talked about this before, the Emperor figure, which is a solid plastic robe figure, and I kept talking about how come they never made it a soft good version of it. Well, apparently the designs were made, the drawings were done, the prototypes were made of an emperor that could be covered in soft goods, and without having the plastic hood on his head, he would have the bald, shriveled up head. And apparently they decided it just didn't look right, with the cloth. Sometimes when they use soft goods, I would say, especially if you look at your Jedi Luke, sometimes the soft goods are just, yes, they do help, but sometimes they don't help. Sometimes they're too thick. They don't wear too well. They're too thick sometimes. And apparently that's what the problem was. With the Emperor figure, it was just going to look a little over the top. So instead they decided to continue with the solid plastic. The other interesting thing about the Jawa is that the fact that it had any kind of soft good or vinyl cape was kind of like a last minute addition. Because if you ever look at the original 12-back art, you can find the art in the books, you can find the art in the back of the cards. When you look at those 12 figures, they all pretty much look like what the final ones look like, except for two of them. The Jawa is one of them that does not have an additional robe or cape on top of what it's already there. If you strip any Jawa off the cape or robe, it looks exactly like what it was supposed to look like on the picture. But it is speculated that the reason they decided to throw something extra on the Jawa was to just give it a little more value, because they were afraid that a figure that small, for a customer to be charged the same price as a bigger figure, a figure twice as big or 3 times bigger, that they would kind of feel, slightly ripped off. So they added an extra cape or a robe for extra value. The other figure that is also a little different is the Obi-Wan. If you look at the art for the Obi-Wan figure, it is not a solid color robe that he's wearing. It's a multicolor robe. There's the orange, but then there's also this very light tan underneath, and even a black interior shirt. Looks very, very different than the solid kind of orangey brick color that Obi-Wan ends up being as one of the original 12 figures. So those are the two ones that are the most different. So yeah, there's a lot of little things that, believe it or not, all this time later, I'm finding out about extra features, extra things that I never knew existed. And part of it is through, examining and comparing, these different type of figures and accessories and ships and vehicles. As I mentioned before, this kind of started when I noticed that peg hole in the back of the original Landspeeder. Well, guess what? The new Landspeeder, they don't include those peg holes. They don't have those peg holes. So part of the reason, I think it's because with the 6-inch line, you probably can't take C-3PO and bend his legs at the knees so he can slide his legs behind the seats into that little cubby hole that you have on the newer version of the Landspeeder. Now R2, that's a tough one. I don't know what you're going to do with R2, because the space to me looks like it's so damn small. And I don't know how he's going to keep from falling off of it if I start to grab it and kind of twirl it around. So in a way, the original Kenner one, I think it's a safer one as far as being able to keep all the figures in their place. Let's take a quick break now and listen to a little spot from our friends at IC Robots. If you're into anything having to do with retro, vintage toys and 80s shows and all kinds of 80s and 70s vintage retro kind of games, television, movies, all of that geek culture that we love here at GeekFest Rants, take a look. When you visit their site, they have a podcast called The Toys R Us Report, and we strongly recommend it. So have a listen.
Tune in to the Toys R Us Report for your weekly dose of pop culture talk that's out of this world. Movies, TV, toys, comics and more every Wednesday on the IC Robots radio network at icrobots.com. What are you waiting for? It's time to get down or come up.
All right, we're back. Thank you guys from IC Robots, and let's continue with our show. For For today's posters of the month, we are going to hit two 80s, what I consider to be classics once again. I'm talking about Fright Night and the Terminator. Let's begin with Fright Night. Fright Night has always been one of my favorite 80s horror comedies, which is an unusual little genre because to me, many times you try to do a horror comedy, it falls apart. But with Fright Night, I absolutely loved it. I saw it in the theater. I loved the music in the film, became a huge fan of Brad Fiedel, first through, ironically, Terminator and, then Fright Night and then many other films that he's done. But this one also brings, if you guys remember, Roddy McDowall, which, another genre legend from Planet of the Apes, into this weird, cheesy, late night movie of the week kind of, theme. Which is a theme that I hadn't really been that familiar with, even when I saw the movie. Later on, I kind of understood that in many parts of the country, many television stations would have these late night movie hosts that would air the most god-awful movies, and they would host them, and they would be really bad, not only actors in, the movies that they're showing, but the hosts themselves were super cheesy. Here in Florida, I know we have something called Svengoolie, which I don't know where it's airing from, but it is that kind of thing. It's a very cheesy late night host kind of showing black and white or not some, older super, I'm talking about C, D, F level movies here. But that was kind of like the theme of this film. It was that this is what this host does, and this is what the kid is a fan of, and that's how they kind of build a movie around it. With the Fright Night poster, they take a very creepy approach at the promotion. And a lot of the posters I've seen for Fright Night seem to kind of come off of this one. This one is basically you get a kind of like a blue and black shady motif. You get a shot of the house and you see the shadow of probably Peter Dinklage, the vampire there, with the two trees on the side. And over the sky and, with the bright full moon, you get all these ghosty looking images of creatures with fangs coming out of the house. And then dead in the middle, you have the face of a vampire kind of creature that could be, when you look at it, it could be the vampire or it could be the girl that later turns into a vampire at a certain point in the film. It could be either one of them if you really think. I think it's more, to me, it looks more like the girl, to tell you the truth. So that's what I'm shooting for. Now, I love researching the background, but this one and the next one were super, super tough. And the most I was able to find about this particular poster is that the artist of the poster is Peter Mueller, that apparently worked for a company called BD Fox Independent, back when they used to do posters for a ton of 80s movies. But unfortunately, this kind of will fall, I think, under the realm of agencies where this wasn't done by a top-notch, superstar poster maker like some of the, the Amselbs and the Struzens and, those kind of people. This was done more for an agency artist. And man, is it tough to find out any information. Any type of Google searches you do, you cannot link that name to any other posters other than this one. And I don't know how the connection ever, got made. I got as far as to find a Facebook page for the agency where people are asking that same question on the Facebook page, asking, is there any information you can give us on this artist and how this whole thing came about? But no, I believe the agency has also probably exchanged hands a number of times, and it's kind of lost out there. So it's kind of difficult to find any information having to do with this. And this is tough. Again, when, we're dealing with the agency, sometimes they're gun for hires and you just don't know, especially if you go way, way back to the 50s and 60s and stuff like that, where they really pumped out a lot of posters without them being, knowing, without the public knowing who these posted artists are. But this particular poster, I remember, was also featured in a similar way in the album, the LP. When I bought the LP, I remember I bought the soundtrack because I absolutely love the music in this. Not only did it have, it's a typical soundtrack where you have your score by Brad Fiedel, which is an amazing score, and your rock kind of tunes to go along with the movie, your soundtrack part of the score soundtrack, which had a very similar picture in the front, except that the words Fright Night were in red. And for some reason, I think the reason I remember it being in red more is because I had that album, in my hands for so long. But the poster, I don't remember exactly when I bought it. I did buy it original. It's an original poster that I have. But I don't know if I ever really displayed it, to tell you the truth, because I don't know. I guess I had so many other posters to display that this one didn't make any kind of rotation. But now it's getting its moment, its month in the, in the podcast studio. The other thing about the poster is that, these things usually have a tagline. And this one is, there are some very good reasons to be afraid of the dark. That's way, way, way on the top. Then you have all the art, and the bottom you have the word Fright Night. And what's cool is that they took the F and the T in Fright and the bottoms, they made them kind of spike downward, kind of like fangs. And underneath the title, it says, if you love being scared, it will be the night of your life. And that's the, that's the little tagline I guess they use for the poster. And you always wonder who comes up with these things. I doubt it's the director or anybody in the production. I think this is all agency or studio related, decisions that are made, especially when you're dealing with somebody who maybe doesn't get that involved or doesn't have that much clout. The director, Tom Holland, was also pretty well known for the movie Child's Play, the original Child's Play, which was a very good movie also, with Chris Sarandon, who's in this movie too. The movie had a sequel, Fright Night 2, which I barely remember it, and I think it was pretty horrible. And later, it was remade. Colin Farrell as the vampire. So, not as successful, but kind of try to capitalize on a lot of the aspects of the film, including some of the logo work was pretty similar. But the original is really the good one, the one that I enjoy the most. And yeah, this is an interesting poster. It's a little weird in a way because the poster lacks color. It's dark and blue, and that's the colors you get to play with the most. And I'm really surprised that they did not purposely put red in the title of Fright Night. Fright Night is in white. Like I said before, in the album it's in red, and it just looks so much better. It makes the poster pop a little more. However, if you start looking at some of the international posters and, all these little offshoot posters, additional rearranging of the art and that kind of thing, they do play with the colors a little more. But it is kind of surprising to me whenever I look at this poster, I always think that the poster is the colors that they used on the album, but it's not. It is kind of void of that red, and it just doesn't make sense to me because, you're dealing with vampires. You gotta have the color red in there somewhere. If you think of Lost Boys and Bram Stoker's Dracula, there's a lot of red in those posters. But this one, this is the type of movie that I don't mind watching every now and then because it's just a fun movie. The next one is The Terminator. I mean, we don't get any more classic than The Terminator. And The Terminator's poster is a little unusual, but maybe not. You could kind of say it's the transitioning of what was eventually happening, and that is going from art to photos, specifically photos of your star. We got to remember here, Schwarzenegger is coming off of Conan, a movie that did not make him a superstar, but everybody started saying, who's this guy? It kind of got everybody's attention. Then with The Terminator, that's what made him a superstar. So obviously, when they're making this movie, they don't know what they got on their hands. And usually, traditionally, everybody, the studios are usually not very trustful and hopeful of whatever product they have on their hands. And that is documented when you read some of the interviews with Cameron about how, the promotion and the marketing of the film really wasn't that strong. The movie became a sleeper blockbuster, more or less, which obviously catapulted Cameron, catapulted Schwarzenegger, got us a franchise out of this movie. But at the time, if you look at the poster, it is kind of a basic poster. The poster I'm talking about right now is the one sheet that has Schwarzenegger in red on top, a full medium shot of Schwarzenegger as the Terminator. He's wearing a leather jacket, no shirt, so you kind of see his chest kind of open right through the V of the jacket, this leather jacket he's wearing. He's holding a gun, which is the gun from the movie, and he's wearing his dark sunglasses, his gargoyles, very interesting gargoyles, and superimposed on the gargoyle on the, his right eye or his right lens, you could see CSM 101, which is the specific model of Cyberdyne Terminator model that he has. I could be wrong, but it could be Cyberdyne system model or something like that. And then you have the inscription in the, right on top of the title, which says, "In the year of darkness 2029, the rulers of this planet devised the ultimate plan. They would reshape the future by changing the past. The plan required something that felt no pity, no pain, no fear. Something unstoppable. They created," and then you have the logo for the Terminator, which is the traditional Terminator logo, and all the credits underneath. What's interesting about this poster is, once again, as I mentioned before, I cannot find any material about who designed it. Obviously, it's not an artist. This was a photo shoot, basically. They're using a photo, which is a photo that's not a stock photo from the film itself. It's a photo from some kind of a shoot, some kind of a promotional shoot that they did. And I've seen photos of this film. You can find them online of Schwarzenegger, in different costumes, wearing different things. But this particular photo, you can kind of find a cluster of photos of him dressed in this manner. He's got the spiky hair, not the hair from the beginning of the film. The beginning of the film, if you remember, he has kind of wavy hair. But then after they set him on fire at one point at the disco where they're all dancing, and his hair gets all spiky, I guess, as a result of the fire. So I guess he's supposed to be in this spiky phase of the character. He doesn't have any scars on his face or injuries, so he's clean. Obviously, you can't see the eyes because he's wearing the sunglasses. And even though the sunglasses, most likely you could probably see his eyes through the sunglasses, especially in a picture this large, they chose, I believe, to purposely airbrush black near the eye so you don't see the eyes, to kind of create that feel of, you don't know what's inside of him. And yes, they did airbrush also the CSM 101, which is the only thing that's kind of unrealistic about it, because in the movie, obviously, you never see that in his eye. You see the red eye later in the movie, but this is something they could have done in this poster, but they didn't. And even forward from his face, the gun that he's holding is slightly out of focus, especially his fingers, because I guess the focus is basically on his face. So to be that close, I guess, to your subject, whatever's in front, your foreground will be slightly out of focus. This is a photo, like I said, that comes from some kind of photo shoot, because I have seen pictures of him in the same outfit in different poses. In the background, it's all black, but there are these red streaks behind them, which I guess could kind of give you the image of lasers or laser sights, which is what's supposed to be coming out of the gun that he's holding. It's kind of laser sighting, on the gun. There are other pictures, like I said, of this particular shoot of him in different poses, and sometimes they have used some of them, not so much on posters, but on some promotional material as alternative promotional material that was kind of discarded, really, because, when they figured out they were going to use this one. Now, I've seen international posters that are completely different, obviously, and there is one very most likely poster that comes out of this, which is exactly like this, except that they airbrush half of his face, let's say here, his left side of his face, so they can airbrush it so it looks like his skin is peeling off and there's a machine underneath. So you kind of get this half face, neck, partly chest area that it exposes the robot part of him. Obviously, for the American audience, you don't want to do that because you don't want to give away the hook of the movie, which is at the end, where all of a sudden the skin comes off and it's just a robot, chasing them around. But this is a different strategy altogether for marketing a film. And this is something that historically has happened, and that is you get away from the film and you are more interested in promoting the star. You got Schwarzenegger's name right on top, and this is something that you're going to end up with all through the 80s, where the number one thing they're promoting is the star. That is what's driving the movie, and that's what's driving the marketing and the promotion. So Schwarzenegger's name is practically, the letters are even bigger than the title of the film. That's how much it's important. And it's also important to show his face to be the size of the poster more. It's half the poster is his face and his chest. 3/4 of it is all that. So that is something where, again, the promotion of the film is very different. Now, don't get me wrong. when they put the poster for Terminator 2, which they already knew they had a hit on their hands to begin with, and now they're having a bigger hit, they kind of had the same idea. They put Schwarzenegger's name on top, except he's on a motorcycle this time. So you kind of shrink him a little bit as far as real estate goes. But it is interesting that, you have this sci-fi film, action sci-fi, and instead of doing some kind of design that you see him obviously bigger than everybody else because he is the star. Okay, we get that. But instead of having him and other players in the movie all around in the poster, they said, screw it, we're going with him. He's the money. He's the guy who's going to be generating tickets. People are not here to see sci-fi. They're here to see Schwarzenegger. So that's kind of like the understanding that was, I guess, accepted as far as how to market this film, which is something that I guess even somebody like Cameron either agreed with or didn't care or played along with. He gets to make the movie he wants. He doesn't really care how it's marketed as long as it's marketed right. The first film was under-marketed, but because of word of mouth and reviews, I remember watching, I think it was Siskel and Ebert, and how they were praising this film. They were like, this is a little sci-fi film that is amazing, and this guy Schwarzenegger from Conan the Barbarian, he plays this character so well. Yeah, this is, soon to become a classic, kind of movie. And yeah, that's what happened. This movie just exploded. And that poster did become, the go-to, logo poster for the film. Now, yes, they did have other things that they were selling at some point, and, they didn't merchandise this film too much. But future DVD versions and Blu-rays, they've alternated art. This particular art, I believe, was part of the first wave of the art. Your first VHS, your first laser discs, that kind of stuff. But as we progress, and they do this all the time, as you progress with different media throughout time, they alternate the art. They look for new art. They create new art. They have new artists kind of redraw the art, all kinds of things like that. So odds are this original poster you will not see on most of the new stuff that's out there, for the film. They rather use newer things. I do remember, but this happens all the time, when you have a movie like this that is not expected to be a gigantic hit, and for a kid my age, this is probably 1984, I think, so you got to keep in mind, this guy in a couple of years, Cameron, 2 years later, he goes and makes Aliens. There was no merchandising for this film. This film was not expected, and there's a typical story where if you're lucky, you can get your hands on a soundtrack, and you can get your hands on a movie tie-in novel. And I did get those things. Those were the only things that were available. But like, for example, he wears these cool cut-off gloves, leather gloves, like kind of biker gloves type of deal, like a driver gloves. So yeah, those were really cool. His sunglasses, those gargoyles became, the go-to sunglasses to find. And I remember I did get a pair. I ended up buying a pair. I think I spent something like $50 or $60, which back then was a lot of money for a pair of sunglasses. But these are special sunglasses. And what's funny about these gargoyles is that they really look good on Schwarzenegger because of his particular facial features. On most other people, they usually look too big. And, he's got a very muscular, bony jaw line, that kind of fit those glasses. But I remember they were selling knockoffs of those glasses, and I could be wrong, but I do remember that at some point, maybe with the VHS purchase or something like that, they would include a version of them that were not the real ones. And I remember that, yeah, I ended up finding the real ones, and I was like, I still have them somewhere. I should find them because that is something that is part of my collection. They probably ended up in one of my cars. It's probably in the glove compartment of one of the cars we have around here, and it's like, no, those should be in a better location than hidden in a car or in a box somewhere. But this is a great poster. Unfortunately, when I got it, it was folded. So I do see the crease lines. I can still see the crease lines, but it's in pretty good shape for what I'm doing with them. And yeah, it's like I said, it's a different time. It's just a whole different time. It's a movie that wasn't expected to be so successful. It's Schwarzenegger's career about to explode with this film. It's a very monumental thing. And Cameron, again, same thing with Cameron. Cameron exploded after this, just like Schwarzenegger. And they collaborated in a number of other films afterwards. So, that wraps up our 2 posters of the month. All right, I hope you guys enjoyed today's show. We started off with Luke Skywalker's Landspeeder, the actual toy, the Kenner toy that is part of that first wave of initial vehicles for the Kenner Star Wars line, and how it's changed to its most recent incarnation of it, this fantastic new one that Hasbro has put out. And then we jumped over to our posters of the month, an ongoing piece that we've been doing for a while now, rediscovering all these old posters I have hidden in my closet here. And we hit the Terminator and Fright Night, two fantastic films from my childhood that I really don't mind watching over and over again. So on behalf of everybody here, thank you for listening, and we will see you soon here at GeekFest Rants. Bye-bye, everybody.
From a future where men must hide underground has come a machine wrapped in flesh who kills but cannot be killed. Arnold Schwarzenegger is Terminator, an assassin from the 21st century sent back through time. His target is a woman who holds the key to the future. Her only hope is a soldier who has hunted the Terminator from the future into the present.
It's not a man. Machine. Terminator.
What does it want to be?
It can't be bargained with. It can't be reasoned with. It doesn't feel pity or remorse or fear. And it absolutely will not stop. Ever. Until you are dead.
Arnold Schwarzenegger in Terminator. Terminator.
If you would like to subscribe to our show, send us messages, or see video links to some of the topics we talked about today, please visit our homepage at geekfestrants.com or our YouTube channel, Facebook page, or iTunes at GeekFest Rants.
I don't know what we're yelling about!
GeekFest Rants is produced by Carlos Perón, copyright 2018.
This broadcast is part of the IC Robots Radio Network. Visit icrobots.com for this and many other nerd/nostalgia related podcasts. You won't be sorry for long.